I need to provide some very brief context so the story makes sense. I go to a public university in California. It's part of the UC system. Some UCs like UCLA and Berkeley and Santa Barbara are much bigger, while others, like mine, are much smaller. Most of the big ones have their own version of what's known as a dedicated tour day, where all the incoming students go to that respective campus to tour it. But really, it's just an excuse for all the current students to throw crazy all-day parties. Berkeley's is called Cal Day, and Santa Barbara's is called Deltopia, just to give a few examples. Now, my campus is about a 2.5-hour drive from Santa Barbara. But it's sometimes customary for students from other campuses to make the drive to bigger schools for that one day. I've never really been one to party like that, so it was never something I did. But a few months ago, I realized it was my senior year, and I'd never get the chance to go again. So, when they asked me if I wanted to come with them to Santa Barbara's Deltopia, I decided to say screw it, and just went. We drove down that Friday afternoon, the day before all the major festivities. The car was completely packed out. Hunter was driving, and the other friends joining us were Damon, Benjamin, and Armin. We're all above 6 feet tall, so the journey was painfully cramped, but it went by quickly with some good conversation and music. Once we got to Isla Vista, we spent the better part of an hour looking for parking with no luck. I'm not exaggerating about the parking situation. That's how popular Deltopia is. Just as we were about to give up, Hunter activated his charm and convinced a sorority girl to let us park in her designated spot. We all got a good chuckle out of that, so everything was going according to plan. Hunter's sister is a junior at UXBS, and she agreed to let us all crash on the floor of her apartment. That might sound a little ratchet to some, but during Deltopia, having a place to sleep is practically a golden ticket. Her and all of her roommates were super chill, so we decided to party with them that night, even though Deltopia technically didn't start until the next morning. There's one more thing I have to mention. Hunter is a really friendly guy, and because of that, a ton of people know him. He has this one friend named Amir who is a little problematic. I'm using the word friends pretty generously here. Amir is one of those guys who clings to social circles without ever really being a part of them. He's insecure, loud, oblivious, constantly seeking validation, and somehow makes every conversation about himself. And before you call me out for gossiping, Amir has done a lot of messed up stuff to my friends and I in the past, so I've earned the right. Amir had mentioned to Hunter a while back that he was also going to Deltopia. There was never any real conversation about where he'd be staying or who he was going with. He wasn't part of our plan, and none of us had brought him up on the drive down. About an hour after the crew settled into Hunter's sister's place, we decided to make an alcohol run for ourselves and her roommates. As the 5 of us were leaving the liquor store with our purchases, who do we see but Amir, just standing there on the curb with his hands in his pockets. No one said anything. We just kept walking towards the apartment, and he sort of fell in step with us like he'd been there the entire time. The first thing out of Amir's mouth once we were a few blocks away from the store was, "Why are you guys so surprised to see me?" Was this kid brain dead? Of course, we were surprised to see him. There was never any plan to meet up with him here, let alone hang out with him. And as far as any of us knew, Hunter hadn't even told him where we were staying. We all kind of ignored him and just kept walking, unsure of how this was going to play out. Things immediately escalated once we got back to the apartment. Amir asked if he could use the bathroom at our apartment and then ran ahead of us when Hunter reluctantly agreed. When Hunter's sister answered the door, Amir walked right up to her and said, "I'm staying here," before stepping past her without waiting for a response. She obviously didn't know who Amir was, but just assumed he was part of our group. When Hunter realized Amir had lied to his sister, he was livid. I could go into extreme detail about what happened first, but here's all you need to know. Hunter told him straight up he had to leave, that he wasn't welcome there, and that lying to his sister was crossing a line. Amir didn't go quietly. He stood outside the door for another 20 minutes trying to argue his way back in. Hunter's not the guy you want to mess around with, so Amir eventually took the hint and left. We got wasted after that, and admittedly, Amir was all any of us could talk about. We realized later that night that Hunter had been sharing his iPhone location with Amir, meaning Amir had stalked us to the apartment. But anyway, the next day was a blast. Deltopia certainly lived up to the hype. Most of the shenanigans were done by late afternoon, so we met up with 5 of our other friends. And the 10 of us found ourselves chilling back at Hunter's sister's apartment. We filled the rest of the guys in about the Amir situation, and they found it just as odd as we did. One of our other friends, Ryland, said he was pretty sure he had Amir's location. He immediately checked it, and his jaw actually dropped. He turned the phone towards us, and I swear to God, the little blue dot was showing up basically on top of us. As soon as we mentioned it, though, the dot started moving away quickly. Like Amir had been spying on us from a car and was now driving away. It was bizarre. Him showing up a second time was borderline psychotic, especially after Hunter had explained to him why he wasn't welcome there. We probably should have taken the whole thing more seriously than we did. That behavior was extreme, even for Amir. Instead, we all just laughed about his weird obsessiveness and continued partying. That night, after we had all crashed, I woke up randomly sometime well after midnight. I barely had time to process my surroundings when I heard glass shattering from somewhere deeper in the apartment. I shot up off the floor, looking around to see if anyone else was awake. No one was, probably because everyone had gone to sleep completely wasted. I realized pretty quickly that no one else had heard it, and if someone had broken in, I was the only one who could do anything about it. I didn't have a weapon or anything, so I just grabbed an empty wine bottle off the floor, took a deep breath, and started creeping toward the noise. My heart was pounding when I entered the living room. I saw the sliding door that led to the balcony had been completely shattered. A huge rock sat in the middle of the floor, surrounded by glinting shards of glass. I didn't need convincing. I knew Amir was behind it. I went to go wake my friends up when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a closet door handle jiggle a little. I froze, more scared than I had been just moments before. I didn't think Amir had the guts to go beyond destroying property, and the thought that he had broken into the apartment terrified me. I was just about to yank the closet door open when my better judgment forced me not to. Instead, I snuck back to the bedroom, woke Hunter up, and told him to back me up. The 2 of us walked towards the living room, but by the time we got there, the closet door was wide open. I looked around frantically, but I didn't see him. That's when Hunter reached into the closet and pulled out this massive kitchen knife. I stared in shock. Amir had literally been standing behind the door with a knife, probably intending to injure me. He could have literally ended my life had I opened that closet door. That was the most horrifying moment of my life. Hunter and I woke the rest of the house up, and we did a sweep to be 100% sure that Amir was nowhere in the apartment. We obviously got the police involved, but all that really came of that was just getting a police report. They told us property tends to get destroyed during Deltopia, and we were one of the many victims. Before you ask, Amir had stopped sharing his location with Ryland, so we couldn't even show the police that. We had to leave the next morning. Hunter was freaked out about leaving his sister and her roommates there, especially knowing that Amir had managed to sneak in there once already. Before we got in the car, he pulled out his phone and typed out this massive paragraph to Amir. I'm not going to air it out here, but you can guess what was said. The message never delivered, though. Amir had already blocked him. We all pulled out our phones and realized we had all been blocked too. Over the next few weeks, none of us heard from him. It was like he had fallen off the map completely. I still can't wrap my head around all of this. As aggressive as Amir often pretends to be, he doesn't have a history of violence. In fact, I've always thought of him as a little passive. He knows where all of us live. So, I'm still worried, even while writing this out, that he's going to do something drastic. I'll send an update should something happen. Music, my name is Arthi. This happened a pretty long time ago, but I'd say I still remember about 90% of the details vividly. It was late April 1996. I was fresh out of basic training, and I had just been assigned to an airbase as a communications specialist in San Angelo, Texas. Being stationed in Texas was great for me. I'm originally from Mississippi, and part of the reason I enlisted in the first place was to get as far away from home as possible. I was 24 years old at the time. My closest friends on base were a guy named Sebas and a girl named Kay. I've since lost touch with them, but back then the three of us were inseparable. It was a warm weekend sometime in early April when Sebas proposed taking a road trip to Austin for the day to experience a change of scenery. Kay and I were also getting sick of the base life monotony, so we agreed. Kay offered to drive, so we packed her SUV with our stuff and hit the road that same afternoon. About an hour into the drive, we were on a mostly empty stretch of highway when Sebas spoke up. He asked us if we had seen the car behind us pull up from the shoulder right after we had passed. I looked back and saw a dark-colored Tahoe or something similar trailing us at a steady distance. I hadn't seen it pull off the shoulder, but being as we were on the highway, it wasn't exactly the weirdest thing. But then Kay changed lanes just to see, and the SUV followed. She did it again a minute later, and again it mirrored her move. I was confused at first, but then a minute later, the SUV put its lights on, and everything made sense. We were getting pulled over by an undercover cop. Kay pulled over, and I watched as the cop pulled over behind us. I'm a pretty observant person. Processing information quickly is something I was quite literally trained to do, so I instantly realized something was off. The guy who stepped out didn't look like any cop I'd ever seen. He was wearing all black tactical gear, but nothing on him that said police. The only thing even remotely official looking about his uniform was a patch on his arm that said something I couldn't read. He didn't behave like a normal officer either. Instead of approaching Kay's window, he stood behind the car like he was waiting for something. I watched him a little while longer and realized he wasn't just standing behind the car, but was actively analyzing it. He was looking through the rear window like he was trying to see the stuff we packed. He was also checking out Kay's bumper stickers and her license plate. Sebas and Kay eventually caught on to the officer's strange behavior too, and Sebas rolled his window down before asking the officer if there was a problem. Instead of responding, the officer swiftly walked up to Kay's window and asked for her license and registration. Kay reluctantly gave it to him. He walked back to his vehicle and didn't return for a really long time. The three of us started whispering about how strange this whole encounter was getting, but we weren't sure what to do. After what felt like forever, the guy finally exited his car again. Only this time, two other men stepped out with him. I could feel my heartbeat ticking up. So I did some focused breathing to keep calm. The original officer walked back up to Kay's window and asked her if her father was in the army or something. Kay asked for clarification, and the officer mentioned the US military bumper sticker on the back of her car. Kay laughed and said that she was the one in the military, then turned to Sebas and I and said, them too. The moment Kay mentioned we were all in the military, I noticed a shift. The guy at her window didn't say anything right away, but his body language stiffened. He glanced back at the other two men who were still standing near the rear of the SUV, and then he glanced back at Kay. There was a weird silence for a second, and then he just told Kay that he was letting her off with a warning and to drive more slowly. He handed back Kay's license and turned around without another word. The three of them got back in the car, and before Kay could even start her engine, the Tahoe pulled off and sped away. The three of us were dumbfounded. Sebas couldn't stop talking about how those guys weren't real officers, and they would have done something shady had we all been civilians. There really wasn't much more we could do, so Kay just got back on the highway. Austin was actually a really good time, and by the time we got back to base, we had all but forgotten about the stop. It wasn't until about a week later that I was reminded of it. I was sitting in the rec room watching the local news with Sebas when a story came on that made me freeze up. Apparently, a man and woman had been found dead in a ditch along a stretch of highway just outside of San Angelo. According to the reporter, the victims had been robbed and murdered, and investigators believe they were dumped there the night before. What really got me, though, was the next part. The vehicle found abandoned near the scene was a black Tahoe. Police confirmed it had been reported stolen months earlier, several states away. Sebas and I instantly went to find Kay, and the three of us agreed we had to tell the police about what we had seen. We told the police everything, and part of me felt a surge of guilt for not telling them sooner. Even to this day, I still think about how Kay's bumper sticker may have saved our lives that day. I can't help but think about how easily it could have prepared for publication been us in that ditch had we not been military. I've always been a really private person. That's part of the reason I've waited so long to put this story out there. I can't think of many worse things than this story getting traced back to me somehow, but I was recently thinking about how it would be a shame to leave this without circulating it. So here it goes. I just want people to know that I'm really stepping out of my comfort zone doing this. About 10 years ago, I was on a solo road trip from West Paterson, New Jersey to Fort Worth, Texas. I was on the way to visit my parents, whom I hadn't seen in a while. I'd moved out of Fort Worth years earlier and hadn't been back much since, so this trip felt overdue. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, maybe Arkansas or the edge of Oklahoma, I can't really remember exactly, my car started acting up. I tried to ignore it for a while, but eventually I had no choice but to pull over. There wasn't much around, just trees, open field, and a long empty road behind me. I popped the hood and started poking around, pretending I knew what I was doing. I didn't. I was just sort of killing time, but I didn't want to admit that I was basically helpless. I figured I'd poke around for a bit, and once that failed, I'd call AAA. I didn't actually have AAA, so I was really pissed because I knew they charged an arm and a leg. A few minutes later, though, I heard a car pulling up behind me. It was a nondescript white pickup truck. I remembered noting to myself that it didn't have a front plate, or at least not one I could see. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. If I had to guess, I'd say he was in his mid-30s, maybe a little older, but worn down in a way that made him seem older than he probably was. He had curly hair and a long, uneven beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in years. He seemed like the kind of guy you could tell worked with his hands a lot, if that makes any sense. He honestly kind of looked like an older version of me. Same build, same height, same hair color, just a bit less well-groomed than I am. He walked over slowly, giving my car a once-over as he approached. He didn't ask if I needed help so much as assume it. Before I even said anything, he was already leaning over the engine like he knew what he was doing. I spoke up and told him what happened, thanking him for stopping to help me. He told me he was a mechanic, and based on how quickly he got to work, I didn't question it. I was already thinking about how I could repay him for the help when he said something that kind of surprised me. After a minute or two of fiddling, he stepped back and gave the engine a look that didn't exactly inspire confidence. He muttered something about needing a compression tester. Apparently, without it, the car wasn't going to start no matter what. Then he glanced over to his truck and said his friend, another mechanic, might be able to bring one over. I honestly had no idea what the part even was that he was talking about, but he seemed genuine, so I believed him. I thanked him again, and he pulled out his phone, presumably to call his buddy. He froze up for a few seconds while looking at his phone screen, put his phone back in his pocket, saying it was dead. He then asked if he could borrow mine to make the call. I didn't even think twice about it. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and handed it to him without a second thought. He took it with one hand and then almost in the same motion. He reached into his jacket with the other and pulled out a gun. I instantly knew what was about to happen. He didn't say much, just told me to sit down on the shoulder and not try anything stupid. His voice didn't shake. He'd clearly done something like this before, or at least thought about it enough for it to seem practiced. I did what he said. The whole thing felt strangely calm, like we were both just going through something totally normal. He rifled through my pockets and took my wallet, my backpack from the passenger seat, and even had me show him the password to my phone. Then he drove off. And that was that. I had literally just been robbed on the side of the road. I know I'm speaking about it calmly now, but you best believe I was livid at the time. I don't think even now I've ever been more angry in my life. Unfortunately, there's more to this story, much more. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but someone eventually did stop and help me. After getting my car started, they were even nice enough to give me directions all the way to my parents' house, so I could do it without my phone. I made it to Fort Worth later that night, and given the circumstances, my visit with my parents was actually really nice. The next few weeks were a blur of canceling cards, replacing IDs, updating passwords, and basically recovering everything I'd lost. It was annoying and time-consuming, but I eventually squared away as much as I possibly could, and I got on with my life. Fast forward, like 6 months, that's when things started to hit the fan. One day, I got a letter in the mail from some bank I didn't recognize. It was addressed to me, thanking me for opening a new line of credit. I figured it was a scam at first, or just some kind of junk mail. But then another one came. This time from Best Buy, with a card I'd supposedly opened and already racked up over $1,000 on. The charges were all from a random town in Tennessee. At first, I was more confused than anything, but that's when it hit me. I had forgotten until that exact moment that my Social Security was likely in my wallet when I had gotten robbed. And now the guy who had robbed me had everything he needed to become me. The next month of my life was a living hell. My credit report was a mess. Hard inquiries, new cards, balances I didn't spend. It felt like every day there was something new. If any of you have dealt with identity theft, you know how hopeless it can seem. I filed a report with the FTC, placed a fraud alert on all 3 credit bureaus, and even froze my credit. I went to the police and gave them everything I had, but without a name or a license plate, they apparently couldn't do a thing. I filed a formal report anyway, just to have a paper trail. I even called the local police departments in each of the towns where fraud had occurred. I followed every step you're supposed to follow, but somehow it wasn't enough. Things kept escalating. Whoever was stealing my identity was being extremely cautious about it. A few weeks later, I got a call from my health insurance provider. Someone had received emergency care under my name at a hospital in Georgia. It wasn't just a billing issue. There were now records in my file that didn't belong to me. Stuff that could actually screw me over if I ever landed in the hospital and couldn't speak for myself. I obviously reported everything to the police again. But that was the last straw for me. I decided to take matters into my own hands. From then on, I transformed my whole lifestyle and spent every ounce of my free time trying to track down the perpetrator myself. I set up Google alerts for my name and any recent cities tied to the fraud. I checked my credit report constantly. I scanned forums and dug through social media. I did everything I could think of. One night, on a whim, I decided to start checking Craigslist. I focused on cities tied to the fraud, places where charges had shown up from or mail had come from. After looking around for a while, something caught my eye. It was a posting from Jack's, Tennessee. The listing was for a bunch of used power tools and some other miscellaneous items. I wasn't sure why it stood out to me so much, but the longer I looked, the more familiar it seemed, and then it clicked. Everything listed matched up perfectly with some of the things that had been charged to that Best Buy card. I sat there for a while, unsure what to do. Eventually, I responded to the listing, saying I was interested in a couple of the items and asked if they were still available. I debated trying to attach a tracker link or something clever, but I didn't want to spook whoever it was. If it was him, and he got even a hint that someone was on to him, he'd vanish, so I kept it simple. To my surprise, it didn't seem like the guy was on to me at all. After exchanging some emails over the next few days, he gave me a time and a public place to meet, and he told me to bring cash. The meeting was supposed to be the next day. I debated driving all the way to Tennessee myself, but I couldn't bring myself to. There's no telling what I would have done to that guy had I seen him in person a second time. So, instead, I called the police department in Jackson to see if they remembered my case. They did, and I basically pleaded with them to help me out. I gave them everything I had and damn near prayed. By some miracle, they told me the details lined up just well enough for it to be worthwhile. They said they'd at least talk to him and see if there was any information they could get out of him. The next day, after a little back and forth, I got the guy to tell me he was driving a red pickup truck. I communicated that with the police and waited. After legitimately several hours, they called me. When they told me what had happened, I wanted to drop to my knees. I swear on my life. The officer told me that as soon as the guy spotted the patrol cars near the meetup spot, he immediately sped out of the lot. He didn't even try to play it cool. That alone was enough to raise red flags, so they followed him. Not long after, the guy ended up losing control of his truck and crashing into a ditch. It wasn't a major accident, but it was enough to get officers legally involved beyond just a casual questioning. According to them, he was a total wreck, visibly shaken, panicking, talking in circles. You get it. As soon as they even mentioned the Best Buy items, he folded. He admitted he didn't know where the stuff had come from, that it wasn't his, and that a friend had given it to him, and he had independently decided to resell it. It could not have been more perfect. The guy ratted out his friends, and with his cooperation, the police were able to acquire enough evidence to arrest the real perpetrator. I've never felt more relief in my life. Like I said earlier, I'm not trying to have this traced back to me, so I'm going to keep things vague from here on out. I will say this much though, the guy who robbed me wasn't acting alone. Turns out, there were 3 of them total. The craziest part is that I wasn't the only victim. From what I was told, they'd been targeting travelers and isolated drivers up and down a few different interstate corridors, mostly in the south. Eventually, all 3 of them were caught, charged, and put in jail. I'm not going to say much more than that, but what I will say is justice was served.